know that you all are coming from many different places and spaces and mindsets. And so, as we prepare to settle into this time together this evening, I just wanted to take a moment of pause because so often we jump from thing to thing. And so, I'll just invite us into just 2 minutes of breath work, breathing, and pause. You'll hear one of my colleagues for this evening, Chodo, ring a bell, um, bowl, and just inviting you to arrive as you need to, if you need to turn off your camera and breathe for 2 minutes, because we know we are living in a world where there is so much that would seek to steal our breath. So the act of breathing is indeed a revolutionary one. And so for just 2 minutes, beginning now.
Thank you, Reverend Jen. Thank you, Chodo. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the second session of Reimagine series, From Suffering to Spiritual Growth. It's co-hosted with our partners, Faith Matters Network and the New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care. I want to give you some background about the theme of this series, From Suffering to Spiritual Growth. As some of you may know, we at Reimagine have been leaning into the process and philosophy of what's called post-traumatic growth, PTG. It's evidence-based psychological research that allows us to recognize opportunity and experience change when we struggle with loss, with grief, with trauma. And one kind of change that can occur when we are facing adversity or suffering is a kind of spiritual change or a spiritual growth. And there's all kinds of spirituality. It can be rooted in religion, it can be rooted in faith, nature, art, activism, acts of service, and anything. It's anything that helps you discover purpose, meaning, or a sense of connectedness. And yes, absolutely, grief can crush you, but we've discovered that it can also deepen your soul. And I'm so grateful to have Reverend Jen Bailey of Faith Matters Network here. She agreed to moderate tonight's discussion with our esteemed guests, Caitlin Breedlove, Chodo Campbell, Mati Engel. Thank you so much for being here. Reverend Jen has become a beloved colleague in shaping this event. So to my beloved Jen, thank you. Jen will tell you more about herself, as will the rest of our speakers. They are masters in how they care for others, as chaplains, as clergy people, or as movement leaders. But I've been wondering about how y'all care for yourselves when you all have broken hearts and you need to be in a position of caring for others. So I hope we'll get into that. You can read their full bios in a link that I'll paste it in a bit. Our guest speakers will be in discussion for around 45 minutes, and then we'll open up for questions from all of you. feel free to use the chat to share what's on your mind. For all of you, I'm curious about anyone who is experiencing spiritual grief or a spiritual crisis and how you're navigating that. Have you felt something akin to spiritual growth after experiencing personal loss, collective loss? And I'm curious, if you have experienced that spiritual growth, where did that take place? Did it take place in a house of worship? Did it take place in a park? Did it take place on a beach, at a writing retreat, on a dance floor, a political rally? So feel free to use that chat. Last week, we kicked off this series with our monthly vigil, in which we invited the public to enter names of loved ones in the chat and a number of other rituals like candle lighting and candle extinguishing. We had some very special guests, Reverend Dr. Emma Jordan Simpson of Auburn Seminary, and writer Dante Stewart, who's the author of the book Shoutin' in the Fire, which is a memoir about love, rage, faith, Blackness, and more. My takeaways from that conversation were the following. If you are open to the idea of spiritual growth, some conditions may be required. 1, be real in how you feel. Acknowledge that the grief you carry is heavy. 2, read and observe things closely. Be present. 3, tend to your mental health. And 4, the idea that heartbreak just might engage you more deeply in the world. I'll also paste a link in the chat from that event recording so you can have a look. So Reverend Jen, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. What a gift it is and blessing it is to be with you all tonight.
So you're an activist, you're a pastor, you're a mother, you're someone who has lost a mother and recently a grandmother. There's this quote from your book, To My Beloveds, that stood out for me. It's, so as you continue down the road of grief, remember that the path you are treading is one that is unique to you. Nobody can tell you how long it will be or the shape it will take. What I do know is that if you are open, it can and will transform you for the better. For me, that's very post-traumatic growth sounding. And in your book, there was a moment at your mother's funeral that to me seemed like an opportunity for spiritual growth. You were preparing to give a eulogy, and you had the sense that this was going to be one of the most important things that you're going to do with your life. But there was some resistance. Can you tell me about that, or tell all of us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for inviting me into sharing a little bit about my story and a little bit about my mama. She passed away in 2016 after a 14-year battle with cancer. At the time, I was 28, and so had lived half my life with a sick mama. And one of the most interesting experiences of being a child with a sick mother is that towards the end of her life, as she was home on hospice, I was not just her baby, although I was always that, but she asked me questions as a minister for the first time, right? She asked me to talk to her about forgiveness. And of course, you know, I have all this theological training, and I was like, oh, forgiveness, let me whip out the scriptures and stuff. But I realized the first question that I had to ask her was who she needed to forgive. And I had a set of assumptions because my mom and I were super close. She was my best friend and my anchor, really my compass in the world. And the answer actually surprised me because her answer was her mom. I've since had a whole lot of insight into that. That answer, now that I know, I don't know who my biological grandfather is. So there's a lot of stuff there, even though my mom and her mom were so close. So when it came to the moment of the funeral, I feel like I'd been preparing for that moment for almost 14 years. And she was an amazing woman who treated stage 4 cancer like a chronic illness. Like she shouldn't have been around as long as she was. Um, and I can remember very distinctly when I insisted on doing the eulogy, which felt like sort of final gift to my mama, how so many people surrounding me, particularly the men in my life, told me that I don't want you to break down and make this about you. um, but they didn't really trust my ability to step into this space within my vocational identity as minister. But I remember distinctly my childhood minister came in from Kentucky, who I hadn't seen since I was a maybe 12 or 13 years old. And he said, "You got a back of steel, girl." And he escorted me downstairs into the minister's room and put my robe on for me. And I mounted the pulpit and told the truth, the story of who my mom was and why I would miss her, but what a gift her life was for me, and what a testimony it was for so many others in the way that she lived her life. And so it was a gift. It was a gift to be able to step into that space. It was a gift to be able to tell the truth of her story in that space. And at the same time, I've experienced, and many of you have probably had this experience too. My mom passed away on Mother's Day Eve of 2016. And I've since become a mother myself in 2020. And again, you can't see it, but maybe I'll stand up. I am expecting another child right now. My first child was a boy child, and I had my own sort of grief around motherhood and becoming a mom without my mom. But I had my grandmother, and he had this beautiful relationship even as a baby, as an infant with my grandmother, his great grandmother. And now I'm expecting a girl child. And the grief is new and fresh because I realized that since my grandmother passed away, right, my matrilineal line is at least gone from this earthly realm. And so grief comes anew. And so one of the things that I'm learning on my own grief journey is that there are moments of both revisiting grief and in growth, grief and growth, that it will always be a part of a cycle of who I am. And that the opportunity in that grief, I've learned, is that as I encounter people who are also experiencing grief, whether that be death loss or other forms of grief, um, it has opened my heart wider to be able to hold that grief with them and to help them remember that they're not alone. Because the only way I got through was because I realized that I wasn't alone, that there were other people who were there to carry me. And so thank you so much, Andy, for the question and for the invitation to bring the spirits of my mother, Christine Priscilla Clark Bailey, and my grandmother, Harriet Payton, into this space. And I hope their memories will continue to be a blessing, not only to my family, but now that you know them a little bit, to yours as well. I am so excited, y'all. I'm so excited to get to moderate this beautiful panel of brilliant people. And so I'm going to kick us off with a question. And each panelist, I have a question just for you, just special for you to each of our panelists this evening. And I'll invite them as they answer these questions to also introduce themselves in whatever way feels most authentic to them and where they find themselves arriving this evening. So the first question is for my dear friend, Caitlin Breedlove, who knew me when I was just a snot-nosed little young minister out here in the streets in my 20s trying to figure out this thing around faith and justice and making meaning in the world. And so I want to welcome Caitlin into this space. And Caitlin, my question for you is this: as someone who I know over the past several years has gone through your own hard time as you've battled cancer and come out on the other side of it, How might the hard things that we have and experience in life lead to a spiritual deepening? If one outcome is often trauma, that's about shattering our belief system, how might those fragments be reassembled, reconfigured, or recycled into a new kind of belief system? So I invite you to the stage.
My friend, it's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to get to connect with all of you this evening. I am in Phoenix, which is why I might be the most scantily clad person on this call. I'm also in menopause, which I started at 39. And I have come to believe and understand that I am sure there are other folks that know what a huge deal that is on this phone. I had no idea, no idea. Like many things, I had no idea about. I am a mother. I'm a single mother. I'm a queer person. I'm barely a cancer survivor. That title still doesn't feel quite like it hits. And not in a cliche, overspoken way, but in a very, very genuine way. My literal heart goes out to all of you who have lost people. Many of you, I'm sure, just numerically to cancer. Those of you who have been struggling with that or any other long term illness. And also in much appreciation for the care that I know some of my colleagues here have provided to those of us who suffer. Um, and perhaps at the core of like how I would answer that question tonight, to those of us who have suffered um, so many different illnesses in this period. I survived ovarian cancer, which some of you might know is a very fatal cancer during COVID. So it's got about an 85% fatality rate. And every time I talk about it, I feel like the first thing that's always on my heart and mind is the 85% of people, women and LGBTQ identified people, people with ovaries who are not here. Many of whom I'm sure would have had more poetic things to say than I do about that journey. But I think how I would answer that question, I've been a community organizer since I myself was very much a snot-nosed little one, Jen. Since I was 21, I'm 41 now. I've worked always in red states and purple states. And I do think that a lot of actually my belief system has been about a returning to belief system I had maybe before my political conception of what my belief system is. But, I think in short that when I think about rebuilding that belief system, I think very much about coming to that kicking and screaming, if I'm honest. I think the spiritual growth I've come through, I wouldn't exactly say I was like, oh, yes, sign me up for that. Right. I think that there's a particular kind of way that dignity and consent and choice has become really sacred to me. And so I see the places that I did consent. For example, I think it's really important, to talk about what cancer treatment is, especially as more and more people, more and more young people are going through that. And not because it becomes important because younger people are going through it, but because it just multiplies the numbers of us going through it. So consenting to the torture that is radical chemotherapy, it's incredibly important to me that I consented, every time, and the reasons why I did that, and one of the few really helpful things that the chaplain at Mayo Clinic said to me, because that poor chaplain was, my God, how many people that guy had to talk to and how few chaplains there were, right? But the thing he said is, that one of the things that was really critical to me was really about consenting, and understanding why you're committing to your treatment. And of course, when you begin treatment, you don't, if you were me, I had no idea why I was saying that, because I had no idea where it was going or how it was going to be. And then the longer that I did it, the more I realized the commitment was important. But the spiritual growth was not necessarily a process or the reassembling of my belief system that I thought, oh, this is I'm consenting to this, right? I mean, some of that did sort of happen to me. I think my belief in, the earth as the primary God, it's hard to believe in anything else when you lose your eyelashes and your eyebrows and your hair and a good part of your face. And then you eat like kale and cashews, and you take a walk and breathe, and you eat all this stuff. And then one day it grows back, your face grows back. I'm not sure that I have a somatic or physical experience of like, that was my consensual choice to believe in that. I feel like that is a physical resurrection that, the earth mother provides, which is, pretty incredible. So I think that the reassembling of my belief system was a lot based on what I experienced in my body, both in the harm done to it and its ability to not even resurrect in some cases, but build completely anew, because really my entire cellular structure was rebuilt. They had to my bone marrow had to grow itself back 6 times in all the bones of my body. And so I think the sense of spiritual growth, I was like, well, sometimes I felt I was trying to keep pace with the healing. Like, could my spirit and mind heal at the pace my body was? Because bodies are so miraculous, in so many ways. And I think this narrative of like, they fail us or they don't, like they overcome or they don't. Actually, I think that they're miraculous in so many of their processes, right? The people that I watched die were other people that were in treatment with me. And I watched other people make decisions to not continue their treatment. And I watched people not make decisions. It happened to them. And I think that, there are some cliches about near-death cancers that are important, which is like, the joke I always make is like, I wouldn't recommend chemotherapy unless you're really sure you want to be here. Like, that would be like, you got to be really sure you want to be here, or I wouldn't do that. And sometimes even if you're really sure you want to be there and you're really sure you want to be here, for yourself, for those you love, particularly for me as a mother with a small child, I could have wanted to be here all day long and still not have continued to be here. But I did make a choice to do everything I could to be here. And so, I think that for me, I'm actually here, I am a writer, I am an organizer, I am a thinker, but I'm also become a stronger listener, I think, through the journey that I've been on, because I think the reassembling of my belief system, Jen, has been a lot about how to actually support with less judgment the dignity and consent and choices of those around me. How to also live my life in a place that's a lot less binary. As progressives and as a queer person, I've absolutely supported and celebrated and cheered on us seeing gender as non-binary. And I also think life itself is not binary. Like, it's actually about an expanding of what's binary. I don't think, my path is the good path and the happy story. I think it's one story. I think it's a story I'm happy to share, but it's one among many, and in no way more worthy or more bringing about of growth than those who came to that threshold of dying and went another way, And I think the final thing I would say is that I think because so much of Reimagine's work is about walking with death. Um, I think that it's really interesting that we live in a country that's um, again and again really obsessed with zombie and apocalypse films, TV shows, especially in the last 15 to 20 years, because I think that also represents like what is dead, what is the undead, what is alive, where's that threshold, how are we walking in engagement with that. And it's been really interesting to me because I actually think that while death itself, there's a finality in the way we engage. What I would say about near death experience is that it's life and death are also not binary, right? And I think we have many, many different ways of thinking about that or engaging that. But my personal spiritual experience was like, you get up knocking on that door. And my experience was like, my ancestors were all around, like, what's up? We're here, we're here. I started to get better. There were a lot less dead folks' energy in my house. They're like, go live, you're on the other side, like come back when it's your time. And I think that that kind of experience, we're not talking about enough in society. I think people come at it different ways, but I do think that that's also very vital. And I think it has, for me, been really powerful in my journey with my own grief about what I have lost. I lost 13 organs, but not my life, right? That I actually think like part of me is dead and it's already in the ground. And that's okay, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing negative about that. For me, it's painful, but it's not the fact that those parts of me have already passed on. That's painful, right? And so I think what I wonder about is where our spiritual opportunities are for growth when we're able to see that actually that threshold is not a binary one. Though that's, an incredibly painful fact when we're facing loss, but I also think it can be an incredibly comforting place to exist inside of. So I hope that answered your question, Jen. I felt like it was about 15 different things, including hot flashes. But yeah, those are my thoughts.
Beautiful. It answered my question beautifully, friend. So thank you so much. In the spirit of this, like spirit of non-binariness, one thing we also know is not binary is often periods of bereavement. And as I think about this, Chodo, as somebody who has a passion that lies in bereavement counseling and advocating for change in the way that our healthcare institutions work with the dying, one question that came to mind for me as I was reflecting on last week's vigil in particular was how do you create spaces for others to process grief when there's larger systemic inequities that may place or impact one's bereavement journey? For some, particularly individuals in underrepresented communities, those facing directly oppressive systems, there may feel like there's no time, space, or capacity for grief, or that bereavement is a luxury. And I know that as somebody who's walked that bereavement walk with so many people, I would love for the folks gathered to hear some of your wisdom and reflection on that question.
Chodo, unmute.
You see how much wisdom I have? I can't even unmute. So I'm not really sure how much wisdom I can impart, but I can just give you. Let me start at the beginning. It really speaks to me of caregiving. How does one live a life of caregiving? My caregiving began at a very early age as a kid, 8-year-old, 10-year-old kid, taking care of an alcoholic mother who I would come home from school and she would be passed out on the couch, and I would have to kind of get her sobered up very quickly before the stepfather came home, and I'd have to do the cooking. And so that was my first experience of caregiving. And then in my teens, craziness, I cry a lot. I'm very easy. It's easy to get me to cry, which I think is one of the. I think Jen, you were talking earlier about how do we take care of ourselves when we're in such grief. For me, it's like I cry. There's nothing that stops me crying. I can cry in front of someone I'm caring for. I just can cry anywhere. Taking care of friends who overdosed, taking care of a good friend who, during the AIDS epidemic in the 80s, I was here in New York. It was a lot of crying then, a lot of caring for, a lot of bereavement. I wasn't really, I hadn't had any training yet in grief counseling, but I think coming from a career of taking care of others, or as my mother was a junkie that had a needle in their arm, or there's somebody that had been stabbed in front of my eyes. It's in caring for whatever needed to take place to take care of the environment and to take care of the person with me. So crying. During the AIDS crisis, as those of you who are here in New York or wherever you were in the States, it was every day there would be someone else who would have died, another friend or someone else that we knew. So it was years of crying almost every day, because almost all of us had lost someone, and it was kind of like just never ending. I lived through the AIDS crisis. I contracted the virus in 1983, and I remember I called my mother and said, "Mom, I got the virus." And she said, "Well, don't talk to me about that. I don't want to know. And if friends ask what happened to you, I'm going to say you died of cancer." And that was the last time I cried for a long time, because it's like, wow, no matter how much I had taken care of her as a kid, there was no kind of compassion coming this way. So I was like, and that was the last time I cried for a long, long time, because I thought, I can't do this. I have to hold on to this. So I got sober 35 years ago now, half my life. And my first 5 years of sobriety, I didn't know what to do. There's no God in my life. I mean, I couldn't take for those of you who are in 12-step programs, forgive me if I transgress here, but for me, it wasn't about God. I couldn't take that on because of all the grief, of all the anger, of all the tears. It's like, there is no God. Where's God in this? If there were, how come? And about 5 years into sobriety, I was leaving my therapist's office, and every Thursday when I would leave my therapist, this incredible woman would come walking towards me, and she was 60 at the time, and she was bald, and she had these big, sparkly blue eyes. And the next time I saw my therapist, I said, there's this woman that I see every time I leave her, and I'd love to introduce myself to her, because there's something about her that I'm really drawn to. And she said, "Well, why don't you introduce yourself to her?" I said, "Well, I feel badly, but she has cancer and she may not, have time for me." And she said, "Well, why do you think she has cancer?" And I said, "Well, she has no hair." And she said, "That's because she's a Buddhist priest." So she shaved her head. So the next time I saw her, the next week, I guess it was, I said, "I'd like to introduce myself. My name is," at that time it was Robert, and I hear you're a Buddhist priest, and I think I'd like to start meditating because, as a child I was incested, and I took care of my mom, and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm in recovery, and I saw this violence, and the AIDS epidemic." And she said, "You know what you need to do? You need to shut up." And in that moment, she said, "Where are you right now?" I said, "I'm here talking to you." She said, "Exactly. This is where you are right now. All the rest is a story. Yes, it happened, it's history, but you're living in this moment. How can you, yes, that's part of your history, that's in your, on a cellular level, that's who you are, but can you be present? Present to this moment, present to what's happening to you right now." I said, "I don't know how to do that." She said, "Well, come to my Zen dome, we'll meditate." And one of she's 94 now, by the way. She's yoga every day. She's in her garden 4 hours a day, and she says, she'll always say, "The Dharma will present you with everything you can. The only thing that you can possibly handle is the Dharma. You just have to show up for it. Whatever it presents, show up for it. That's the best thing you can do. So 5 years into sobriety, something happened that shifted the whole trajectory of my life. And I began my calling, which was to be a chaplain, a volunteer at first in hospice, and Beth Israel Hospice, and which is where I met my now husband. We've been together 22 years, and taking care of his grandmother when she came into hospice, and seeing in the hospice the nurses, the volunteers, the doctors, everybody was too busy, running. And it's not to say that they weren't doing their job, it's just they're so overworked that oftentimes we saw the patients not really getting any interaction. I remember there's a wonderful story of Koshin's grandmother, my partner's grandmother, and and we were both ordained at the time, and she said, a little Jewish lady, like Hungarian Jew, like 4'2" or something. And she said, you know what? I'm 86 years of age. The rabbi puts his head in every night and says, on the Shabbat, he says, Shabbat Shalom, Mrs. Ellison. I'll pray for you and I'll see you on Monday, God willing. She's like, and that's my rabbi. That's the care I'm getting. She said, I think you Zenis ought to do something because you know how to listen to people. You know how to take care of people. You need to do something to get something off the ground where you can actually listen to people, be with them, and just sit there. And very often, all I do is sit there. Just sit there. Listen. Bear witness to what's happening in each moment. And sometimes it can be so heartbreaking. And to bear witness to it, all I can do is cry. Cry with the person. Be with them. To show my own vulnerability, to show my own humanness. Yeah, it's okay to cry. Let's do this together. Let's cry together. Let's walk on this journey together. And so many times I've walked with or companioned folks from the diagnosis. Somebody on the screen tonight did co-facilitate. We co-facilitate a group coming to terms where we had everyone, the participants have all being given a terminal diagnosis. Most of the women have terminal cancer. We have a guy with Alzheimer's and another guy with cancer. And this group of persons, this group of men and women, sitting there each Thursday afternoon, holding each other in their collective grief, in their collective life, looking forward to the next day, looking forward to birthdays and christenings, but not knowing if they will actually get there. And to see them take care of each other, it's like throws my caregiving out the window, because it's like, look at this, so archetypal. Like these women just holding each other virtually on Zoom. It's so amazing. So it's not about us that's caregiving. We're facilitating. They're caring. They're the ones doing the caring. And there's many a time when, when one of them's on the trajectory towards, a few days towards dying, I've just cried on the screen, kind of like, the most heartbreaking is the experiences I've had, which is not so many right now because the work that I'm doing now is it's usually, by referral. So I'm seeing lucky, white, affluence, for the most part, middle class, white people they've had a beautiful life, and death is the great equalizer. It's like no matter who we are, what life we've had, how much we've had, how little we've had, death is a great equalizer. But I remember working in there used to be a place called Rivington House, which was a huge building for people living with HIV/AIDS, and the largest percentage of the patients there were marginalized from they were either black, or people of color, 80% of them, and to see them not getting the care that they needed, again because the system overworks the staff, was so heartbreaking for me to be able to sit there and say, well, I know that I was going to be leaving there and going to someone else's home who were living on wherever it was, but not in the same conditions that this person was living in. And I swore I would do everything I could to be with people of different colors, different faiths, to show respect and to be with them all in the same way, to bring love, respect, dignity to whomever was dying, however they were dying. There were homeless people in this shelter, so people with comorbidities, not just HIV/AIDS, but diabetes. I went to, I was in Zimbabwe about 10 years ago in Harare, and I was asked to go there as a chaplain. I was invited to go there as a chaplain, but not as a Buddhist, but just as a chaplain. So I couldn't wear my Buddhist robes. I couldn't wear this. I had to wear a check shirt, like back in the old days, khaki pants, and it was like, who is this person here? Like, and I had to go not as Chodo, the priest, but as Robert, the ordinary guy, but knowing that I was coming as a contemplative caregiver. And I got to, in Harare in Zimbabwe, is where the rubber really hit the road for me. To see such cruelty there. I was working with the HIV/AIDS population, and in the squatter camps in South Africa, seeing in the squatter camps in particular, 2,000 people crammed into a few hundred square feet, maybe a mile square feet, not getting the HIV drugs that they needed because of the system was so corrupt that they were being sold to the wealthy, and the people living with HIV were getting Tylenol. That's what they were getting, and to witness children who were infected by their fathers, 9 years of age, and I would break down every day, every single day, because it just got, the grief I couldn't hold the grief. It just kind of, I don't know. I hope I'm making some sense here, because I'm just going back into my stories. As I said at the beginning, all I can do, one of the things I can do is cry, not hold on to it any longer. When I got that conversation with my mother, it's like, okay, I'm done, never again. Volunteering in Beth Israel, volunteering in Rivington House, working with marginalized population, all of them dying ultimately from HIV/AIDS, and then going to South Africa. And it's like, wow, this has been such a calling.
Yes.
This is not a vocation. This is not a job. This is a calling. And I wake up every morning blessed that I'm able to do this. Right now, I'm taking care of a mother, 86-year-old mother, and a 4-year-old daughter, both on hospice, living in the same home. And that, walking into that home 3 times a week and seeing the transformative and the spiritual growth between mother and daughter, mom not wanting to die before the daughter, daughter not wanting to die before the mom, the conversations they're having, they both knowing they've got weeks to live, and the conversation they're having with each other around what this death is like, this approaching death. It's, to bear witness to that is like one of the most incredible journeys I've had so far in this whole life of taking care of. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for the gift of the stories that you just shared with us. My goodness. And for the gift of your tears and permission that tears indeed can be a balm for healing and for spiritual growth and transformation. Thank you so much for sharing of yourself and the wisdom that comes from living, from living your story. I'm going to turn now to Mati. Oh, Mati, we haven't known each other long, but the more I read about you and more that I get to know about you, my goodness, your story is just so powerful. You're an artist, you're a spiritual caregiver, you're a chaplain, you support so many people and communities. And so, one of my questions for you is a little bit more practical in terms of what are some of the tools and resources that you've found to be most life-giving and nourishing as you've accompanied people in their both their grief and in this process of post-traumatic growth and transformation?
Thank you. And thank you for hosting me. What an honor. I feel like both, I feel very moved by Caitlin and Chodo, and I'm trying to find myself in that being moved. I relate to topics that both of you shared, and I think that one in particular is what it takes to be a caregiver, to show up as a caregiver, and to have the bandwidth to do that. And I will say that I am absolutely somebody who has ran to this, like when trauma hit, when COVID-19 hit, my instinct was to run to the hospital and to serve. That was my first initial gut reaction. That's what I needed to do. I felt called. And so I listened to the calling. I set up shop. I was a chaplain in New York City at Mount Sinai Hospital, working mostly with substance abuse patients and transplant units, and clocking in every day, doing shifts covering 5 different hospital sites that Mount Sinai has across Brooklyn, the Bronx, Queens, giving my weekends to just all of the traumas and losses that New York City was accruing. And I found that while both it was an absolute gift and treasure to be a part of such intimate moments in people's lives, I was arrogant in thinking that I had enough bandwidth for what was coming my way and what was coming at me, and how much, I would even say, trauma my body could interface. And the fact that as a caregiver, when I come into a room and I'm with a patient, that energy, or that you walk into a room, it's almost like you're doing performance art, because you have no idea what to expect. You're walking in, you're like, who's who, who's mom, who's actually the patient, who needs care, and how do I fit in here? Where's my entryway? What rituals needed? Maybe they don't want rituals. What words need to be said or don't need to be said. And it's this constant improvisational act. But I found that I came home exhausted, completely depleted. My body was shot. By the end of my residency, I looked like a skeleton. I was I had no flesh on me. I was just giving and giving and giving. And I didn't know how to feed myself while I was doing that. It felt like when I reflect on it, because it's been 3 years now, and when I reflect on it, I'm like, did I hear the calling? I'm like, yes, I did. I know exactly where I was. I know that I was walking on my own. I felt this directed path, and yet I got burned. And so I'm kind of been, in the last 3 years, I would say, I've been sitting with this piece of myself that wants to serve, but doesn't want to give myself over in that process. And so I've actually transitioned my caretaking onto a different platform. I do a lot of my caretaking actually on Zoom. I find that having some distance from the site of the trauma or from the site of the grief gives my body more space, more buffer. And I've actually been working more with psychedelics. I needed more tools. I wanted more tools so that my patients would be able to come forward to me with their spiritual epiphanies and spiritual explorations with plant medicine, with the guidance of plant medicine and the teachers and mentors that have taught me, and I'm continuing to learn because it's absolutely a new field in some senses. And I found that in that space, I'm meeting my client or my patient in a way where like I am not doing extra work in order to excavate for them what their spiritual experience is or can be, or what the meaning making can be. It's like they come to me and they're like, I have all of this material. How could we make sense of it? What could we do with this? And if it's okay, I know we have like a little bit of time. I thought maybe I could share a little bit of a transcript from a client that is very happy and willing to share what her experience was like being guided on a ketamine journey. And I think it'll speak to both, chaplaincy, end of life, and, working with stage 4 pancreatic cancer and knowing that you're facing death. So I'm gonna share just a brief transcript. I'm just gonna read it. This was a client that I saw over the last 2 months. We've only done 2 treatments because her body was kind of getting to a place where it couldn't recover from the ketamine after doing it twice, but we really got somewhere beautiful. So she would give a title to our encounter calling, she would give a title to her ketamine session as Meeting the Angel of Death. And I'm going to read almost verbatim what came through her. And this was, again, with her permission and with her consent. And it's for the sake of just making it more known, like what tools are accessible to us. And for me, that's just a delight to be able to share that with the world because it's more new and it's a little bit avant-garde. So as she says, so my intention that I set forth in this journey was to address issues of trust. This has been a theme throughout my life, which can make one kind of live in survival mode or out of defense mechanism mode. And so I wanted to address that during my dying process. I didn't want to die surviving and holding on, both for my own sake and for the benefit of others. I don't want to leave fighting just so I can hang on. And so I thought going into this ketamine session, I really wanted to have an intention to address trust as an important topic in letting go. And so when she talks about the actual journey itself, the session started with a voice saying, "Come closer," which remained a through line throughout the journey experience. As I seemed to get off track or get lost, I would hear it again, "Come closer, come closer." And it would bring me in focus. It all started with that auditory sensation, something that materialized as a voice saying this particular phrase, "Come closer." And whenever I got lost, it would bring me back. It was a beckoning. It wasn't so scary or frightening. It was rather an invitation. At some point, I stopped feeling my body completely, which was actually a relief. It was a relief to feel the sensation that I couldn't feel my pain, and I enjoyed that. Then as my breathing became my focus for me, I noticed that as I exhaled, it was as if my spirit was just a few seconds behind my body, a bit beyond my body. It felt like my physical body and my spirit were separating as I was breathing. My spirit lingered out of my body a little bit longer than when I was done exhaling. There was definitely a separation, and it felt like my spirit was practicing leaving, but not going too far away. Like a fledgling, like a bird that doesn't go too far from the nest as it's learning to leave the nest. And so as I got off track a little bit more, I would hear again, "Come closer, come closer." And then, in our encounter, she kind of got out of breath. And so we just slowed down and we took a breath. And then she came back and she said, this time I realized that I was looking at death in the face. It was kind of this quintessential iconic visual with death, you know, when you have the cloak and the blackened face. I was looking directly in the blackness of the face of death. And instead of being frightened, there was this knowing at the point of death that death would be kind to me, and that it would be gentle, and that it would happen when I was ready. A little bit further. And this ties back to trust issues and the intention that I started with. There was such a compassion with this message, more than anything I felt in my life, or even from any other person, more than any love that I felt from a person. There was a love in being beckoned towards death and being called closer, come closer to death. And I began to weep. And the sensation of it was like coming home, like the prodigal child coming home to open arms. It was so warm and so welcoming. And you can imagine the emotionality that would accompany that. And keeping with the body and the spirit thing that happened before, both visually and tactically, I saw my body explode into a million iridescent blue butterflies. I could feel parts of me leaving and flying away. It was this big swirl of butterflies, and there were millions of them. It was like an explosion. And again, I had that auditory sensation, hearing, feeling, dreaming phenomenon of come closer, come closer. I heard an echoing, like Ollie, Ollie, oxen free. It's like this expression kids would use when playing hide and seek and tag. And when they were tired of the game and they wanted it to end, all they would say is, everybody, whoever's hiding, you're free to come home, you're free to come back. And then as soon as that happened, my sister came back and it was all over. And then just as a last point, I asked her, you know, after the ketamine session, well, you know, now that it's out of your body and you're away from that experience, what do you feel? What do you think on reflection? And she said, again, pretty much verbatim, overall, there's this movement towards a greater acceptance, a less fearfulness, almost a welcoming for death. Physically, I'm down to 98 pounds. I can't eat. I have to take pills to go to the bathroom. My life is nothing remotely close to what it was. I'm getting pretty tired of this phase of it, of my body decomposing. And so I feel like I am walking, but I'm walking more upright towards it, still hesitant, still some of that reflexive survival knee-jerk reaction, but I'm definitely walking more upright towards it. Come closer. So that was just a bit of an excerpt from the work that I'm doing right now, which is work that nourishes me as I'm also providing. And so it feels like I come to the table and I am moved by my patients. I was always moved by my patients, but this is like another level of being moved. It's like tools that I think spiritual practitioners can really use to, you know, further the field, but also know that there are ways to do our work where we are accompanying patients and clients, but they're also helping themselves. And I think I'm still in this process, in this journey of figuring out, like, what is that equation? What is the right, I would say, because I am aware that I'm speaking on a public, you know, platform, and this is new medicine. And so I don't want to be the one that's like, oh, we should all like go towards this direction. It's going to set us free. There's so much to be studied here. But the nexus point of death and psychedelic medicine is so new and so underdeveloped. And that's something that I really look forward to as a way to also care for the care providers, because we need more tools. And burnout is pervasive. I don't think I'm the only one that interfaced with that. And so I'm really excited for the future of medicine. I hope that answered your question.
And answered my question beautifully. And I'm gonna pivot us to be in conversation with one another. And so my question is, as you are hearing one another's stories more deeply, what questions arose that you wanted to ask each other? what arose for you, just to give space for a little bit more dialogue and engagement across this really powerful and dynamic group?
Oh my gosh. I mean, for me, there's just a lot of appreciation and resonance, as someone who was cared for a great deal. Um, I also would say that I think, one of my questions for Mati is about what patterns you've seen, um, in what can help. Um, Actually, it's sort of a question for both of you. Like, what are the things that comfort and ease? Because for me, I feel like it's a comment and a question. People do that. I'm one of those. Like, I feel like my experience is that, like, what's interesting is when you have very, very few choices,
Mm.
right? Choices become really important. Like the choice about if I'm gonna, you know, walk in there by myself and get chemo again, or choice about if I'm gonna use psilocybin and psychedelics. And in fact, I found that the use of psilocybin to be very spiritually healing from the pain of needing to use opioids, which was a very bad. My opioid use and my subsequent dependency completely humbled me to any arrogance or preconception I may have had. The withdrawals, the whole process of using for almost a year, and in a lot of ways, I felt that for me, the use of psilocybin in particular um, gave a space of connection and grounding that was actually in many ways not opposite, but healing from the impact of both chemotherapy and opioids. And I think that I resonate very much with an clinching and accepting, freeing. Even Chodo, what you were saying about crying, I was not a big crier. I was trained in progressive community organizing. Like, you're not the white girl that cries in the meeting, right? Like, I was not the one, right? And like, I never cried so much my whole damn life, except when they like put you in the like, you're the I hate to say it, but you're the victim of the doctors, right? And you can tell they're not telling you the truth, and then you figure out like, oh, they're trying to like figure out, they don't know if I'm going to hospice or if I'm going to chemo yet, so that's what they're not telling me, right? Like, and I think about those kinds of experiences and like what actually helps the human mind and spirit land the
Mm.
next stage of their path, right? Like, whatever that next is. And I think, one thing I would be curious, you both shared some, but if either of you, like, what are the patterns that you have seen, if there are any that have eased that have, like, what are the patterns of the needs and the things that have actually supported a facing of those moments in a particular way? Because who not everybody knows they're going to die, right? Like, not everybody knows they're going to hospice, not everybody knows, right? Like, sometimes you don't know too. And so, like, what are the things that you found that I mean, I guess bring comfort and bring dignity and bring, self-determination or support in that process?
It's a big question. Each person's dying, each person's journey towards death is unique to them. It's the same as anyone that's grieving in my bereavement groups. Their grief is unique to whomever is grieving. Marty, help me out here. It's such a big question. I know
Yeah.
for myself, in my experiences, the moments that it could be weeks or days before the person actually dies, when they know that they're dying, not those who are in denial of death, but those who know they're dying and they know it's going to be anytime soon. The shift from all their perceptions of what life was, how they were in life, what life had brought them, what it hadn't brought them, and their regrets, their regrets. When it turns to, I'm dying. This is what I got. Do I want to go into that dark night angry, miserable, regretful? No. I'm right here, right now, on the journey. To me, that's, I hate to use it, a good death, but that's a death that I appreciate. It's a death that I see with there's such dignity in that in those moments when the patient or the person or the just says, yeah, this is it. Done my work, either as badly as I did it or unskillfully as I did it. Now I can leave all those worries, those concerns behind. I just want to be in this process. And oftentimes it's, Chodo, will you walk with me through this process? And absolutely, no question. Till your last breath, I'll be there with you. And again, that's one of those moments where I just, I'll just lose it. There's, I can stay there, I can stop there. It's enough.
Yeah, it does feel like it's like a PhD question. I could just share some scattered, fragmented thoughts. The excerpt and the bit that I brought from that patient, I would say that out of all the patients that I've met, and it's not as much as Chodo, but it's a substantial number, right? Enough to say that maybe only 2 to 5% of people are actively engaging with this question of what does it mean to bravely, courageously, honestly confront death. I don't think that many people are having that conversation with themselves. If anything, I think that the variety of exits that I've seen as a chaplain, and also like the moments of when I see exits, like it could be I have a conversation with somebody and the next day they're just not there. Mm-hmm. It could be that I walk in and they just died moments before and I'm now holding hands with the family around the bedside. There was a moment where I spoke to a man and he told me not to wear all black as a chaplain. It's not a good look. Next day, gone. So just what scenes I am a part of as a chaplain or as a caretaker, and being a part of that intimate moment, it's if this is where being an artist is I can't really separate them in a way, because it's I don't know where I'm going to come in on the scene. And I don't know what life is going to, or God is going to allow me to partake in that experience. And so with that, I would also say that the compassion that is required to stay present with the patient or with the family is actually the sense of there is no recipe, because every single situation is different. And that means every single kind of caretaking is going to require a different skill of adapting to what does the patient actually need? If somebody's in denial about their death and that's their faith, I am not there to break down their denial. If their denial was a defense mechanism that kept them going to see their daughter on their birthday and then the next day they died. So there's the skill of just knowing and learning and being taught really harshly, what does it mean to care and who am I caring for? And how much, the other party is involved in that process of walking towards their death or walking home. And that there's a variety of how willing, or I would say it might even just be what incarnation are you up to? Where are you spiritually on your journey, on your trajectory, that you are actually engaging with that question? And then for me, it's just a blessing to be along as a student. I'm learning as I'm walking with you. So that's what immediately comes to mind. And the last thing I would say is Stephen Jenkinson's work is really amazing in this regard, in that there's this sense of just a critique for Western medicine and hospice, and just how we hide death, or how death kind of pops up at us only when we need to face it. Otherwise, it's behind hospital doors, it's secluded, it's isolated. And so we have to face it in this like really intense way because we're not talking about it. And I think that's something more socially that we can educate ourselves on, and maybe think about how to adjust healthcare so that we're not thinking about it at the very last breath, but rather like preparing for it. So that's my thought.
Ooh, and what a brilliant thought it is. And I'm actually going to let that be the last word. I can't believe we're already at time, y'all. There's so much richness that I think still to be mined here. Thank you so much for your time this evening and just sharing so fully and beautifully of your stories and yourselves. I'll invite Andy back to close us out.
You know, Jen, you messaged me privately like, okay, when Mati, finishes this slide, I'll pass it back to you. I'm like, okay, but I don't want this to end, actually. I want this to keep going. I want there to be a part 2. I can't believe I scored tonight. I scored with these 4 amazing individuals and bringing them together for one of the most mind-blowing events that I think I've ever worked on here at Reimagine. And I'm just so grateful to all of you. And it's really a privilege to be here with all of you. And I don't know, maybe we can figure out a part 2 in the future. So thank you. Thank you all. And I pasted in the chat a link to the 3rd event in our series. I hope all of you will join us for that. The theme is all about action and taking those small, sweet steps towards this spiritual growth that we've all been talking about. We've got another wonderful group. This time it's a trio. We have Soren Glassing, who is a Buddhist monk, a chaplain at New York Presbyterian, and a graduate of the New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care. We have Rabbi Sidney Mintz out of San Francisco at Temple Emmanuel, who's participated in many Reimagine events, and our interim board chair, Pastor Corey Kennard from Detroit. I hope you'll come. You will get this recording, I promise. Caitlin, Chodo, Mati, and Jen, thank you so much. I wish everyone a beautiful evening.